Late Friday night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The glaring light illuminated the dark bedroom, revealing a message from my father, Drake. He announced they would be using my house for 3 days. He called my coastal property the perfect venue for his corporate retreat, speaking as if the deed belonged to him. I stared at the glowing screen, my pulse thudding heavily against my ribs. I typed back immediately, stating that I had just undergone major spinal surgery and could barely walk. I asked them to come the following week. My mother, Beatrice, answered for him seconds later. The plans were not changing. They were coming anyway. Saturday morning. The heavy mahogany front door swung open. They barged into my Charleston home, dragging expensive leather luggage across the threshold. Drake marched right past my medical bed in the living room. He did not ask about my incision. He did not ask about my pain levels. He simply grabbed my specialized orthopedic pillows and hurled them onto the hardwood floor. He complained loudly that my medical equipment ruined the luxury aesthetic of the room, completely disregarding the fact that I needed them to keep my spine aligned. I gripped the cold metal handles of my aluminum walker. Every muscle in my lower back burned with a dull, relentless ache. I just needed to reach the kitchen counter to take my prescribed painkillers. I took one agonizing step into the hallway, accidentally blocking his path. He stood there holding a heavy wooden case of imported wine. Instead of asking me to step aside, his face twisted into a mask of pure annoyance. He drew his foot back and viciously kicked the metal leg of my walker. The aluminum frame slid violently across the polished floorboards. I lost my balance instantly. I collapsed onto the hardwood, my knees taking the brunt of the impact. A white-hot spike of agony shot straight up my healing spine, radiating into the base of my skull. I gasped, clutching my back, completely paralyzed by the sudden explosion of pain. Drake just stood over me, his leather shoes inches from my face. His expression held absolutely no remorse. It held only disgust. He leaned down, his voice dripping with pure venom. He asked who I was performing this cheap act for. He ordered me to get up, claiming I always wanted everyone to revolve around my fake weakness. He pointed a stiff finger down the hall toward the utility door. He ordered me to get into the laundry room and stay out of sight. He stated that Morgan Walker, the vice president of his corporation, was arriving soon. He leaned closer, the smell of his expensive cologne mixing with his malice, and swore that if my pathetic display ruined his promotion, he would erase me from the family forever. My mother stood exactly 3 feet away. Beatrice held a stack of pristine white linen napkins, preparing the dining table for a party I never authorized. Her hands trembled slightly, but her feet remained glued to the floor. She never moved to help me. She just looked down at my bruised knees, her eyes darting nervously toward her furious husband. She lowered her voice to a pathetic, pleading whisper. She told me to just endure him. She begged me not to make a scene. She said he was incredibly stressed about his upcoming corporate promotion, and I just needed to hide inside the back room so the house could remain peaceful. Then she turned her back and went right back to folding the linen, prioritizing a dinner napkin over her bleeding daughter. I dragged myself down the hallway. Every single inch felt like pulling my own body weight up a jagged mountain. I pushed the heavy utility door open and collapsed onto a thin spare mattress, squeezed tightly between the washing machine and the roaring water heater. The room was utterly suffocating. The air was thick, hot, and smelled heavily of industrial bleach and damp cotton. The metallic hum of the water heater vibrated constantly against my skull, a rhythmic pounding that matched the throbbing in my spine. Lying there in the sweltering dark, the memories crashed over me with suffocating force. Drake had spent his entire life treating my existence as his personal property, mining my achievements to build his own ego. When I won a full academic scholarship to university, He stood in front of dozens of our relatives at a family barbecue and loudly bragged about how hard he worked to pay for my tuition. When I finally saved enough money from working double shifts to buy this beautiful coastal house, he threw a massive dinner party before I even unpacked my boxes. He introduced my home to his wealthy friends as his brand new investment property. He demanded the spare key. He demanded my unwavering gratitude for simply existing in his presence. And Beatrice always stood right there in the background, smoothing over his egregious lies. She spent 34 years telling me to be the bigger person. She conditioned me to believe that keeping the peace was easier than facing his wrath. They chipped away at my sanity for decades, demanding quiet obedience while they stood on my shoulders and called themselves tall. They expected me to simply absorb the collateral damage of their endless ambition. But laying on that mattress, pressing my aching back into the floor, the heavy, suffocating weight in my chest suddenly vanished. Drake thought my broken spine made me helpless. He thought he could break my physical body, and my spirit would immediately surrender out of habit. He forgot one crucial, undeniable detail about my life. I have been an emergency room nurse for 10 grueling years. I triaged combative, completely unhinged people every single shift. I handle screaming addicts, violent trauma patients, and manipulative liars while keeping a perfectly straight face. I operate best under catastrophic pressure. I know exactly how to stabilize a crisis, and I know exactly how to neutralize a monster. The tears drying on my cheeks cracked against my hot skin, the sadness completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clinical clarity. My pulse steadied to a calm, methodical rhythm. I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants and pulled out my phone. The screen cast a pale blue glow across the cramped, humid walls. It was time to go to work. The roaring water heater vibrated against my shoulder. Sweat pooled at the base of my neck, sticking my cotton shirt to my rigid medical brace. Outside this suffocating wooden door, Drake was aggressively preparing to play the generous, wealthy host. He was preparing to steal a massive sum of money from his own employer, using my home as the bait. He had set up a fake holding company under his own name weeks ago. He intended to charge his corporate division a massive $25,000 venue fee for a coastal estate he did not even own. On top of that staggering fraud, he ordered $20,000 in imported wine, Wagyu beef, and lavish floral arrangements, so $45,000 in total. He planned to submit the entire inflated invoice to the corporate accounting department on Monday, pocket the massive venue fee, and ride the fabricated success straight into a vice presidency. I adjusted my posture on the thin mattress, ignoring the sharp spasm of pain gripping my lower back. My mind moved at lightning speed, calculating the exact legal trajectory required to destroy him. I opened my messages and texted Evan. Evan is a ruthless real estate and family attorney, and he knows my father's pathological, manipulative games better than anyone on earth. I typed 3 rapid lines explaining the corporate theft, the unauthorized catering situation, and the physical assault. I asked for a very specific, inescapable legal snare. No lengthy consultations. No waiting around for the administrative courts to open on Monday morning. We operated on emergency room time. We needed a tourniquet, and we needed it applied immediately to his financial throat. 7 minutes later, a PDF document hit my inbox. Evan named the file a private debt acknowledgement. He brilliantly disguised the contract to look exactly like a standard neighbourhood association liability waiver. The title sounded completely mundane, boring, and highly bureaucratic. The clauses hidden inside were absolutely lethal. It explicitly stated the signer took full, unshielded personal responsibility for all vendor costs, catering expenses, and property liabilities, permanently waiving any right to corporate reimbursement or third-party payment. I forwarded the email to Drake. I kept the message extremely brief, adopting the cold, urgent tone of a security guard. I typed that the neighbourhood security gate required this specific waiver signed immediately. If he ignored it, the guards would turn the catering vans around and ban them from entering the community. Through the thin drywall, the heavy mahogany front door swung open. Morgan Walker's booming, authoritative voice echoed in the grand foyer. The corporate executives were arriving. The pressure was mounting rapidly. Drake's entire carefully constructed illusion depended entirely on those catering vans backing into my driveway. He needed the silver platters. He needed the visual performance of immense wealth to secure his promotion. My phone screen illuminated the dark laundry room. The delivery receipt updated. The document had been viewed. I held my breath. The washing machine rattled violently against my spine. In his mind, Drake was completely untouchable. He genuinely believed he was the smartest man in the room, forever immune to the consequences of his own actions. Reading the fine print was a task for the little people, not for future vice presidents. He was far too busy schmoozing Morgan Walker and handing out expensive champagne to care about a boring neighbourhood security form. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation banner. The document had been digitally signed. A sharp, breathless laugh escaped my lips, bouncing off the humid walls. The trap clamped down, ironclad and completely irreversible, with one arrogant, careless swipe of his finger. Drake legally bypassed his fake holding company and severed his access to the corporate expense accounts. He bound the entire $45,000 debt directly to his personal identity, his social security number, and his retirement funds. The cramped space shifted around me. It was no longer a prison. It was a tactical war room. Drake built his whole life on the deeply toxic assumption that other people would simply absorb the cost of his destruction. Beatrice absorbed his emotional collateral, constantly buffering his rage. I was supposed to absorb his financial collateral, sacrificing my home for his ambition. He thought he was brilliantly securing his long-awaited promotion. He just signed away his entire financial future. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my pocket. The financial trap was set and sealed. Now, it was time to drop the guillotine. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes carried easily through the drywall. 14 corporate executives mingled in my living room, marvelling at the sweeping ocean views I had worked years to afford. Drake's voice boomed above the soft jazz playing on my expensive sound system. He laughed heartily, commanding the attention of the room, playing the gracious, independently wealthy host flawlessly. I shifted my weight on the mattress to ease the burning in my spine. My elbow banged hard against the metal side of the washing machine. A dull, heavy thud echoed down the hallway. The jazz music paused. Heavy footsteps stopped right outside the laundry room door. Morgan Walker's deep, authoritative voice resonated through the wood, questioning the sudden noise. Drake slid perfectly into his practiced victim routine. His tone dropped into a mournful, exhausted register. He apologized to Walker for the disturbance. He spun a tragic, sickening tale about his severely addicted daughter. He claimed I was heavily abusing painkillers and suffering from violent medication-induced psychosis following my surgery. He painted himself as the exhausted, loving father, forced to bring his hysterical, unstable child along on a business trip just to keep a close eye on her. He fed them a spectacular tragedy, polishing his own halo while dragging my professional and personal reputation through the mud. I pulled up the smart home application on my phone. The security cameras I installed last year covered every inch of the living room and hallway. The footage from earlier that morning was already saved, backed up, and queued. I waited, listening to Drake accept the sympathetic murmurs of his colleagues. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing chime that cut through the polite corporate chatter. Drake excused himself, walking toward the foyer. The heavy door groaned open. Evan stepped across the threshold. He did not come alone. 2 uniformed police officers stood flanking him, their radios crackling quietly in the tense silence of the foyer. Drake froze. The charming host evaporated, leaving behind a frantic, cornered man holding a crystal flute of champagne. He demanded to know what was going on, attempting to puff out his chest and project authority. Evan did not look at him. He stepped past Drake entirely and walked directly into the centre of the living room. Commanding the attention of all 14 executives, he asked for Morgan Walker by name. The vice president stepped forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Evan introduced himself calmly as the retained legal counsel for the sole owner of the property. He handed Walker a thick manila folder. He stated, in a voice clear enough for the entire room to hear, that the gathering was an unauthorized trespass. He explained that the property was never leased. The corporate venue fee was entirely fraudulent, and the man claiming to be their host was actively attempting to embezzle $25,000 from their corporate accounts. Drake lunged forward, sweating and frantic. He shouted that Evan was a liar and I was delusional. He tried to snatch the folder, but a police officer planted a heavy hand on his chest. Walker opened the folder. On top was the property deed in my name alone. Beneath it lay the digital liability waiver Drake had just signed, legally binding him to the catering costs. Evan wasn't finished. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase and handed it directly to Walker. No dramatic broadcast to the room, just the unfiltered truth for the man in charge. Walker stared at the screen, watching the crisp footage of Drake violently kicking my Walker. He watched me collapse in agony and heard Drake's abusive insults, ordering me into a laundry room like a stray dog. The room went dead silent. Walker's champagne flute slipped, shattering against the hardwood. He handed the tablet back to Evan, his face a mask of absolute disgust. He glared at Drake, who was trembling, struggling to invent another lie. Walker raised a hand, silencing him. He fired Drake on the spot and ordered his executive staff to evacuate. The corporate audience filed out in total silence, leaving the fake host standing alone among the silver platters. The lead police officer stepped forward, placing Drake under arrest for domestic assault and trespassing. He twisted Drake's arm behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed across the ceiling. Drake thrashed, his face turning purple. He screamed about family loyalty and how I was ruining his life over a misunderstanding. The officers ignored him, shoving him toward the exit. Evan stepped into his path, holding up the signed liability document. He informed Drake the $45,000 debt was legally binding and collections would levy it against his retirement accounts by Monday. The colour drained from Drake's face. The realisation hit him like a physical blow. He had just financed his own destruction. The police dragged him out to the cruiser, the heavy door slamming shut and cutting off his shouts forever. I pushed open the laundry room door. The living room was empty, except for Beatrice. My mother stood near the shattered glass, shoulders shaking. She rushed forward, digging her fingers into my forearm, begging me to call the police off. Playing the victim, she sobbed that Drake had forced her to go along with the charade, demanding I fix this for the sake of the family. I forcefully pulled my arm away, staring directly into her panicked eyes. I kept my voice dead level. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. You were never forced. Mum, you just loved your own cowardice more than you loved your daughter. She stepped back, a ragged sob tearing through her throat. I pointed toward the open front door. She stumbled backward over the threshold, weeping. I pushed the heavy mahogany door shut. The deadbolt clicked into place. The suffocating noise vanished. A deep peace settled over the house. It was finally mine. 4 months later, Drake pleaded guilty to felony aggravated assault and criminal trespassing to avoid a highly publicised trial. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in a state correctional facility. But the criminal sentence was just the beginning. A week later, Evan executed the civil judgment. The court ordered Drake to liquidate his stock portfolio to cover the $45,000 debt, plus $22,000 in legal fees and punitive damages. He lost $67,000 in a single afternoon. The social fallout was merciless. His country club revoked his membership, and the colleagues crossed the street to avoid Beatrice. His carefully curated empire burned to ash. Winter arrived. I was sitting on my porch when the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope bearing the state penitentiary's ink stamp. I recognised Drake's messy handwriting. I knew exactly what was inside desperate justifications, elaborate demands for forgiveness, and pathetic attempts to guilt-trip me by weaponising the concept of family. A year ago, that letter would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. Now, my pulse remained steady. I didn't open it. I didn't wonder about his excuses. I simply dropped the sealed letter into the recycling bin. That hollow thud was the only response he would ever get. I carried my tea inside. The hallway smelled like cinnamon and fresh pine, replacing the sterile stench of bleach and fear. My spine was fully healed. I walked without a brace and without the suffocating weight of my parents' expectations. The doorbell rang, but it didn't trigger a spike of panic. I opened it to find Evan and 2 of my fellow ER nurses carrying groceries and a bakery box. We spent the evening eating pastries on my living room floor, laughing until our ribs ached. These were the people who had held my hand through physical therapy. They were my chosen family, loving me for my presence, not my property. True peace is incredibly quiet. It never requires a flawless performance. Looking back, the greatest gift Drake ever gave me was kicking that walker. He shattered the illusion permanently. People like him don't see their children as human beings. They see mirrors to reflect their greatness and bank accounts to fund their delusions. To a narcissist, your boundaries aren't an inconvenience. They're a violent attack on their manufactured reality. I survived the fire, and I pulled 3 ironclad rules from the ashes. Rule number 1. Blood is a biological fact, but family is a behavioural choice. Sharing DNA doesn't grant anyone a premium pass to abuse your kindness or exploit your success. You are not required to finance their delusions. Rule number 2. The enabler is often the most dangerous person in the room. The peacekeeper telling you to be the bigger person just wants you to absorb the abuse so they don't have to deal with the tantrums. You must cut the human shield out of your life, along with the sword. Rule number 3. Boundaries require brutal, measurable enforcement. A boundary without a consequence is just a polite suggestion. You cannot love a toxic person into respecting you. True peace costs courage, effort, and sometimes police intervention. So, who in your life is currently using your guilt as their personal ATM or emotional punching bag? And what will it cost your soul if you never learn how to change the locks? Share your story in the comments. You are allowed to walk away from people who intentionally hurt you. Even if you share a last name, I am safe, I am healed, and I am finally free.